So we'll hope for the best on their delivery. They always tell you, you know, it's going to be like, whatever, 8 hours, but hopefully they won't be that long. If you didn't hear, there was like a woman that looked like her dad and her young little wee child walking by. Did anybody notice them just a minute ago?
Yeah.
And the little kids are so interested in you all. You do all know that about kids. And so the little kid's like, oh, what do you think you're doing in there? And the mother said, oh, I bet it's detention. That's my art history class. You guys look like you were kind of running amok. You know what I'm saying? Walking in when I said I know. I was personally insulted. All right. If you are driving, we're going to move fast. I do want to alert you to that. So this is not meant to be for copious note-taking. You've done that already. This is meant to go back and see things for another time, go over some big points. So we're now going to travel to Egypt. And reminding you again that if your 30-minute prompt asks for a non-Western, a non-European example, and very well put, Egypt is another choice that you can make. Now, chronologically, Egypt and Mesopotamia run at approximately the same time. They are both great river civilizations. They're very dependent on that. In mastering agriculture long before the Northern Europeans did. Yet from there, there's a lot of differences. Reminding you that, of course, the great river of Egypt is the Nile, the life source of Egypt. Right? And reminding you that really a great deal of her stability comes from her topography. So that, you know, she really is surrounded on many sides by deserts. She could control the delta, so again, reminding you the Nile flows north as it flows into the Mediterranean Ocean, the Mediterranean Sea. All right, so really having a chance of great stability. Now, the exception, and we'll get to the exception, where we see a change is really a shift in our canon. Other than that, our canon stays pretty much the same throughout the Old, the Middle, and the New Kingdom. So just taking a look. I would say that this is a must-know piece. So when you can identify this must-know piece by name, and then tell me the event, the historical event that is recorded on this piece, put up your hand. I can name it, and I think I can do the event too. Megan, thank you.
The Pylon Temple and the unification of Upper and Lower.
Now, a couple of things we've done earlier, so we've talked already about hierarchic scale, we've talked already about registers, but reminding you that here we see Nar in that very, very standard Egyptian pose, so you want to make sure if you would see that you could recognize it. And with that concept, with the idea that Egyptian pharaohs are almost universally idealized. Are we solid on it? We're not really looking at portrait sculpture. Now, reminding you that the Old Kingdom is the only time in Egyptian history where we bury our pharaohs in pyramids. All right, so we are obsessed with the cult of the dead in ancient Egypt. The vast majority of our art in Old Kingdom Egypt deals with the dead. Right? So here we can see the step pyramid of Zoser, one of the earliest of the pyramids, that gives way to, obviously, what are the more traditional pyramids, and these are from the Giza pyramids, associated a little bit later. Okay. Now, reminding you that these are, again, tombs for the pharaoh. Reminding you that here we see a composite animal, a guardian figure, and what's he called? Sphinx. Now, we're going to take a look at a number of pieces of tomb art, right? And we're just going to start with copper, because he's up here first. But I want to remind you now, you want to be very good about the fact that this has a radically different purpose, okay, than what we saw in Mesopotamia. So that these would have been isolated in the pharaoh's tomb and meant to serve as an element of recognition in the event that his mummy would be destroyed. That if the Ka would return to the pyramid, it would recognize the tomb art. So note now, we're going to go through these kind of quickly. Note that in these, you're going to see all three positions of tomb art: seated, standing, or on the ground. All right, so you want to be very good at that. But note that no matter what I put up there, okay, it's very rigid, It's very frontal, it's very symmetrical, and clearly the Egyptians don't understand the concept of contrapposto weight shift. All right, so we know that. Ooh, do I don't have my phone in here. I gotta go back and get my phone, but not for a little bit. They're not gonna call me that soon. All right, no, I'm not gonna do that. All right, now let's take a look at a Middle Kingdom. This is the tomb of Beni Hassen. Now it's in the Middle Kingdom that we move to rock-cut tombs. So now we're gonna start to hide important burials. What are these, say it loudly for me, what are these columns called? Reserved, well done. So obviously serving no structural purpose, purely decorative. All right, now we're going to transition to New Kingdom Egypt. Now New Kingdom Egypt is going to be the most complex. So I mean, you're going to need to stay with me on New Kingdom Egypt. The pharaohs really reassert their power, their authority, and it's in New Kingdom Egypt where we again return to monumental architecture. So the pyramids had served as that kind of, that element of the propaganda piece for the pharaoh, and now we have two types of temples. We have mortuary or funerary temples, and this is the mortuary or funerary temple of Queen Hatshepsut. I want to really call to your attention what you can't see in this is the river Nile flows over here, so it's this wonderful setting for Queen Hatshepsut during her lifetime to come and worship. Note that worship is divided according to socioeconomic status. Okay. Note that each of these would have been filled with lovely statues of Hatshepsut, lots and lots of beautiful trees. Okay. Now, we're not certain of this, but it would be a lovely element for you to remember. Okay, equally true of the mortuary funerary temple of Ramesses II at Abu Simbel. What's a more recent theory about another purpose of mortuary funerary temples? We're only studying two, but it applies to all of them. Morgan, thank you.
Is it to distract from where they actually did their values?
Where they actually had their
Gold or body?
their bodies. Okay, so that the valley of, that's good, no, you're right. The valley of the kings and the valley of the queens, or just so you can hear that, well, they'll actually flash up here really quickly, are the areas of burial in the New Kingdom. Right? So really kind of latest research is that these very elaborate, these huge mortuary funerary temples always had like this little entry, like, oh, well, this could be where the pharaoh's buried. Well, the pharaoh's not buried here. Now, oh, it's up to the top. Dang it, how can I wish you were Atlanta now, okay? But now Atlanta now is a column that takes the shape of a male's body. So these reserved columns on the inside of Abu Simbel, okay, would be Atlantis. Okay, let's take a look at the other type of monumental architecture. And these are known as Pylon Temples. And the Pylon Temple gets its name from its monumental gateway or entranceway to Pylon, and you can see that from the sides. But I want you to take note, because I think this is a more important feature, how the pharaoh would promenade through the Pylon Temple, making his way to the inner sanctuary. So here's where the courtyard, where the worker bees, we used to call them slaves, we don't really think they were held as slaves anymore. So the worker bees here, the dignitaries in the hypostyle hall, we'll look at that in the middle, and the pharaoh in the inner sanctuary. So take a look at some pylons. They were standing in the courtyard looking back, hypostyle hall. Okay. Now again, note this great invention of the clear story in your sanctuary. All right, this is just Valley of the Kings, just to kind of show you that, so I'm going to take a lot of time here. All right, now here we're going to move to the Amarna Period. Now I would say stakes are very high now. Right, so this would, in my mind, probably be the greatest of the go-to pieces. This is just one of those elements of really showing refinement of understanding New Kingdom Egypt. Right. The Amarna Period happens during the New Kingdom. In fact, we just looked at Abu Simbel, and Abu Simbel is built after the Amarna Period. So everything kind of stays the same in the canon, and then we get this Amarna Period, and things shift. And then the Amarna Period's over and it goes back to how it used to be. Put up a hand, please. Put up a hand, please. Let's do the bigger, more important question. All right. what would be your go-to point that this is Egyptian? If you saw this sunken relief, this is sunken relief, if you saw this sunken relief, how would you know it's Egyptian? Because that's probably the good, important starting point. Kate, thank you.
The hieroglyphics?
Nice. Make our lives easy. We see hieroglyphics. All right. Now, after that, what would be your go-to point that this is from the Amarna period? So the bigger point is you got to know Egypt, my friends. That's the bigger point. Then you can say, yeah, but now I know others. Maggie, you're coming back?
Yeah.
Maggie did kind of one of these.
Is it the, like, bubble head or whatever?
Yeah, that bubble heads would be great. I think that would be fun if you wrote that on an AP test. I wonder if I'd get a letter from them. Anyway, that's great. All right, no, it's a really good one. Bubble heads I'll take. I think that's great. Connor, thank you.
They're not ideal.
They're not idealized. Savannah, thank you.
Big lips.
Big lips. All right. Now, you ready? Let's do the really hard one. Let's just go for the hard one. All right. Identify this figure. Who is this out in front, closest to Aman, the sun god? Who is it right out there in front? Who is that person? Who is that person? Thank you for all these hands. Maddie, thank you. In front.
Is it Akhenaten?
Akhenaten, well done. All right, now here we see Akhenaten. Right? Now take a good look at him because we don't have, because a lot of the works of his was destroyed. So we have very little from the Amarna period. You have pretty much seen it all. All right. Now, can you recognize it as Egyptian? Can you recognize it as from the Amarna period? So how about this sunken relief? Good. Okay. This is his wife. What's her name? Nefertiti. Well done. Now, here are the daughters of Akhenaten. Can you see on that one too? Okay. Now, this is the really kind of lesser pharaoh that gets a great deal of attention, but reminding you that Akhenat's tomb, when it was unearthed by Howard Carter, is really one of the greatest finds from ancient Egypt. A nobody pharaoh. I don't mean cruelly, God bless Akhenaten, but I mean Akhenaten because Tutankhamun was a very, very lesser known pharaoh, but we found his tomb almost completely intact. Now, what you need to know, now this is what your go-to piece is, because that's what your average American knows. Your go-to piece is, what is the transition from the Amarna period back to the more traditional Egyptian canon? That you can look at him and you can still see some signs of the Amarna period. Are you good at seeing that? Okay. I'm going to come right back. I won't be nearly as long. I just have to have my phone because that's how the piece person's going to call me.
Probably about 65%.
Is that going to be too dark? Yeah, it's okay. We're going to get to most of our thing.
Everyone heard that. That's all I have to say.
All right. Leaving us, I hope, some time for some things that offer a little more complexity. So let's get started with our briefing. Remind have a pre-culture. So you want to be good about taking yourself to the Aegean Sea, and you want to be really good about being able to kind of do your geography, something maybe the Americans need some help with. So the pre-culture revolves around the Aegean Sea, but we're going to go from the Cycladic Islands here down to the island of Crete, so we'll do that next, and then we'll go up to the mainland, okay, for our Mycenaean period. Now, the Cycladic idol is your go-to point on your Cycladic unit, your go-to point. So look at her, note a highly abstracted female, found where? No, we're on the Cycladic Islands. Tomb. She's tomb armed. So she would have been placed in the tomb. All right, don't think about her standing up. Think about her on her back. Right. Now, the island of Crete is the Minoan period. The important thing to remember about the Minoans is they're supposedly were just very joyous people, seafaring people, okay, celebratory people, and then almost all of their work revolves around the Palace of Gnosis. And you want to look at the Palace of Gnosis and you want to see how it reminds you of a labyrinth, of a maze, all right? And this very large central courtyard, okay, where they would practice bull leaping. We'll see that in a minute. And this was a setting for the later Greek myth of the Minotaur. I'm going to remind you of that. Now, you have to know that from this class, but just as you proceed on your education, you know, you want to be able to tie that to this, and that'll help you. Now, let's remember that they practice the Fresco Technique. By now, you've gotten to be experts on frescoes. I mean, you've done so many. But this was a first stop for us. Right. Now, I would say the Torieto fresco is the bull leaping fresco is by far the most important Minoan fresco to hold on to. Why is that, Ms. Peters? Because it's joyous, it's celebratory, it's all the things they were. Here you can see the two Minoan women. Now here's your Minoan canon right here. Okay, this long dark hair, this pinched waist, okay, open bodice. We can't really quite see that from here, but that's very common. Right. Now this is very important. That we know that the potter's wheel was invented on the island of Crete during the Minoan period, and we know how important bases are in our Greek canon. This is very important. Now, how would you look at this and immediately identify this or any other Minoan base? What sets it so far apart from what's to come? Thank you for these hands. Libby.
The subject matter is like.
Nice, nice. Let's get, how many do we need to have now? 3. Thank you. Jackie.
The subject like takes over the entire composition.
Not contained in a register. Nice. Okay, so you want to kind of use your nice terms that you have. Tanya.
The light background.
Nice. So note the contrast, dark on light, light on dark. All right, and I think really the earlier point, but just to remind you, can you see how the octopus complements the shape, the swelling of the vessel? Are you good at that? I'm going to do that one. What do we call her? Snake goddess. All right, now she's the great mystery of the Minoan canon, just so you know. Okay. But we'll get to a very famous work. Was Judy Chicago's dinner party on your summer work? Yeah. Okay, good. All right, great work. You'll see that the snake goddess is invited to sit at that dinner party. All right, now I'm going to come over here because I stand over there too much. Let's go up to the mainland to the Mycenaean canon. Now, the Mycenaeans were a warrior culture, so very different. This is one of their citadels. What construction technique do you see here?
Corbel.
Corbel, well done. All right, so they utilized Corbel construction. This is the Lion Gate of Mycenae. That'll be good. Now, this is not a treasury. That's a bad name for it. Right? These are known as their beehive what? Tombs. And this is where the great Mycenaean princes and kings were buried. Now you want to look at this and you want to see the Corbel construction. I want to make sure you always are being a good architect you need to be. Right? So we're going to walk in, be inside of this. Okay, note again the Corbel construction, an early Corbel dome. And then we see that they would actually bury their dead with treasures, much like the Egyptians. Right? And so borrowing this tradition, you just look at Tut's funerary mask. So here we can see a Mycenaean funerary mask. Put up again and identify what would be the most important difference. Like there are tons of differences. But if you were gonna go for like the jugular, if you're gonna go for like the go-to point, Anna, what would that be?
Not idealized.
Well done. All right, it's not idealized. Done. All right. All right, let's push on now and do our Greek canon. Now, there are two things that I think are important for you to remember about the Greeks. There are probably 1,000. These two will get you by really nice. Right? The driving force behind the Greeks was one word. What was the one thing that you were almost always going to have to talk about, no matter what I throw at you Tuesday with the Greeks? Lily, thank you. Refinement. Refinement. It is refinement, refinement, refinement. All right? And how rapidly that refinement takes place is somewhat the complexity, but I think it's also what makes the unit interesting. Now, the other one is the little quotable quote that I like, and that is that man is the measure of all things. So we're going to see now be good about this, because we just keep throwing out these terms so casually by the time we got to the Renaissance. But you want to see that the Greeks were the first great humanists. You want to see that the Greeks were focused on the here and the now. You want to remember that the most important subject matter was the male nude. Okay, you just want to be really good at knowing this canon. Now, obviously, one of the deficits, and we have to operate in deficits, is that the only form of painting that we can study with the ancient Greeks are their vases. So if you get a 30-minute essay, okay, on painting, and you could, all right, you need to remember you're going to be isolated to vases if you pick something Greek. That's all we have. All right. Now, obviously, we're going to begin in the first period. This vase is from what period? Good. It was used how? Funerary. Marked a tomb. All right. There would be a small hole in the bottom so that whatever kind of libations you would bring could drip on the dead. All right. Now, looking carefully, we would talk about the fact that geometric vases have multiple registers. Well done. And then the subject matter is funerary. Now, we call it geometric. Now, look carefully now, because really how highly unrealistic the human body is made here. I'm reminding you, we're looking for refinement. So, note that we rely heavily on geometric shapes. Because we haven't even gotten to the time period where they started identifying our historical period. It's not until the 18th century. All right, so people in the 18th century looked back and tried to kind of categorize things. So, you've got to kind of look it through their eyes, because I think it's helpful here. Now, forget that, we're not doing that. All right, so, that's the Orientalizing period. All right, so now we move to our next big stop. And what period is this? Archaic. Now, I lied. Earlier, remember Thomas Peter said that there were two big things you need to know?
No.
I'm going to add a third. Okay, and that is making sure you can do your chronology. If you can remember the classical period, you can always do your chronology for the Greeks. If you can just remember the classical period. All right. I'm really going to tell you now, that's your go-to, that you lean on it heavy. Right? And because of course you know the Archaic comes before the classical. Is everybody good on that? You're good at that. You're fine on that. But it's just that date thing that some of you have to really, just address your Achilles heel. If dates are your thing, just look at it and treat it, all right? So we know the Archaic comes before the classical period. So anyone want to take a stab on the dates of the classical period so we get situated where we are chronologically? Olivia, thank you.
480 BC.
Well done. Okay, so 480 BCE is the go-to point. Now, 480 is too nitpicky for Miss Peters. You can just say, it's the 400s, it's the 5th century BCE. Are you staying with me on that? So Archaic, we're looking obviously at the earlier centuries, the both the 6th and the 7th year. Now, taking a careful look at her, taking a careful look at him, we would easily see that Archaic statuary is influenced by what earlier culture? Egyptian. Well done. So like the Egyptian,